Marcus Cain ruled Chicago's underground with an iron fist and a cold smile, until the day he underestimated the quiet accountant, who knew every secret buried in his books. When she walked into his office with evidence that could destroy him, he laughed and said the words that would seal his fate. "I can hire 50 like you." Her response was a whisper that cut through his arrogance like a blade. "Do it." 24 hours later, his empire crumbled, his allies vanished, and the woman he dismissed stood in the ruins holding everything he'd ever built. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what part of the world you're listening from. Marcus Cain stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office on West Wacker Drive, watching the Chicago River reflect the late autumn sun in fractured gold. The city sprawled beneath him, a kingdom of steel and glass that bent to his will. At 42, he commanded an empire that stretched from the South Side warehouses to the North Shore estates, built on construction contracts, political favors, and carefully laundered money that flowed through legitimate businesses like water through cupped hands. He adjusted the cuffs of his charcoal Tom Ford suit, the fabric whispering against his wrists. Everything about Marcus was calculated. The silver threading his dark hair at the temples, the Patek Philippe watch that cost more than most people earned in a year, the way he held himself with the relaxed confidence of a man who'd never truly been challenged. His reflection in the window showed a face that could shift from charm to menace in a heartbeat, strong jaw, ice blue eyes that missed nothing, a mouth that smiled easily but rarely with warmth. Behind him, the office hummed with quiet efficiency. Mahogany furniture, leather chairs the color of dried blood, and abstract art that cost 6 figures, but meant nothing to him. What mattered was the message it sent. Marcus Cain had arrived, and he wasn't going anywhere. The door opened without a knock, the only person who had that privilege. Vincent Calabrese, his second-in-command for 15 years, walked in carrying a tablet and the perpetual scowl that came from managing the messier aspects of their operation. "The Bridgeport deal closed," Vincent said, his Chicago accent thick as the November wind off the lake. "Alderman's on board. Construction starts in spring." Marcus nodded, turning from the window. "And the union?" "Handled. They'll use our crews, our suppliers. Clean as it gets." "Nothing's clean, Vincent. It's just well hidden." Marcus moved to his desk, a massive slab of walnut that had belonged to a railroad baron a century ago. He liked the weight of history, the reminder that empires rose and fell, but power was eternal if you knew how to hold it. "What about the quarterly reports?" Vincent hesitated, and that pause made Marcus's attention sharpen like a knife finding bone. "Iris is still working on them. Says there's some discrepancies she's tracking down." Iris Thorne. The name landed in the room like a stone in still water. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not quite irritation, not quite interest. She'd been his senior accountant for 3 years, hired away from a prestigious firm downtown with a salary that made her colleagues jealous and a benefits package that bought loyalty, or so he'd thought. "Discrepancies," Marcus repeated, the word tasting wrong in his mouth. "She's thorough. You know how she is." He did know. Iris was 31, brilliant with numbers, and possessed a quietness that most people mistook for weakness. She dressed in muted colors, grays and navy blues that helped her disappear into boardrooms and back offices. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a neat bun, her face bare of makeup except for a touch of something that made her green eyes seem larger than they were. She spoke softly, rarely smiled, and had a way of looking at people that made them feel transparent. Marcus had hired her because she was the best, and because he'd thought her ambition was limited to spreadsheets and tax codes. Now, standing in his office with Vincent's uncomfortable silence filling the space, he wondered if he'd miscalculated. "Tell her I want those reports by end of day," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of an order that wasn't really a request. Vincent nodded and left, and Marcus returned to the window. Below, the city moved in its endless rhythm, cars threading through streets, people hurrying against the cold, the Chicago Transit Authority trains rattling on elevated tracks. His city, his kingdom. But kingdoms needed foundations, and foundations needed architects. Iris Thorne knew every number, every account, every carefully constructed shell company that kept his empire standing. She knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. Mostly metaphorically. The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Cain, Ms. Thorne is here to see you." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, a predator's response to unexpected movement. "Send her in." Iris entered like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the Persian rug. She wore a charcoal dress that hung loose on her slim frame, sensible flats, and carried a leather portfolio that looked older than she was. Her face was composed, unreadable, but her eyes, those sharp green eyes, held something that made Marcus's instincts scream a warning he chose to ignore. "Iris, I was just asking about the quarterly reports." "I know." She set the portfolio on his desk, opened it with precise movements, and extracted a single sheet of paper. "I found something you need to see." Marcus didn't sit. He remained standing, using his height, 6'2" to her 5'6", as a subtle assertion of dominance. "What kind of something?" "Transfers that don't match the documentation. Money moving through accounts that shouldn't exist. Signatures that don't quite align with the ones on file." She spoke without inflection, each word measured and careful. "Someone's been skimming from your operations, Mr. Cain. Someone with access to everything." The room temperature seemed to drop. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, not at the theft, but at the audacity. "How much?" "Over the past 18 months? Approximately $12 million. The number hung in the air between them. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities, suspects, consequences. 12 million was enough to fund a rival operation, buy protection, disappear into a new life. It was also enough to get someone killed in ways that would serve as a lesson to anyone else who thought about stealing from him. "Who?" The word came out flat. "Dangerous." Iris met his eyes without flinching. "I have evidence pointing to several people in your organization, but I need more time to be certain. These things are layered, hidden behind legitimate transactions. Whoever did this knew exactly how your systems work." "How long have you known?" "I started noticing irregularities 6 weeks ago. I've been building the case since then, making sure before I brought it to you." She paused, and something flickered across her face. Was it fear? Calculation? "I thought you should know before I finalize the audit." Marcus studied her, this quiet woman who held his empire's secrets in her careful hands. She'd always been loyal, efficient, invisible. Now she stood in his office with evidence of betrayal, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. "I want names by tomorrow," he said, his voice carrying the cold promise of violence. "Everyone involved, every account, every transaction. Can you do that?" Iris nodded once. "Yes, Mr. Cain." "Good. And Iris?" He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the desk, invading her space with deliberate intent. "This stays between us. You talk to no one. You trust no one. Understood?" "Understood." She gathered her portfolio and turned to leave, and Marcus watched her go with a strange unease coiling in his gut. Outside the window, clouds were rolling in from the lake, turning the afternoon gray. The first drops of rain began to streak the glass, distorting the city below into something unfamiliar and uncertain. Marcus Cain had built his empire on the principle that everyone had a price. Everyone could be bought or broken. As he stood alone in his office, listening to the rain begin its steady drumbeat against the windows, he didn't yet realize that Iris Thorne had never been for sale, and that the foundation of his kingdom was already crumbling beneath his feet. The rain fell harder, and somewhere in the building below, Iris Thorne sat at her desk and made a phone call that would change everything. The rain continued through the night, turning Chicago's streets into rivers of reflected neon and washing away the last remnants of autumn leaves. Marcus Cain didn't sleep. He sat in his Lincoln Park brownstone, a 19th-century mansion he'd restored with money that couldn't be traced, drinking scotch that cost $2,000 a bottle and thinking about loyalty. His phone buzzed at 3 a.m. Vincent's name appeared on the screen. "Talk to me," Marcus answered, his voice rough from whiskey and exhaustion. "We got a problem. Tommy Breslin's missing." Tommy Breslin ran their Southside operations, gambling, protection, the kind of street-level work that kept cash flowing upward. He was reliable, stupid enough to follow orders without question, and had been with Marcus for 8 years. Missing how? Didn't show for his check-in. His apartment's cleaned out. His girlfriend says he left 2 days ago with a suitcase and 20 grand in cash. Marcus felt the scotch turn sour in his stomach. 2 days ago. Right after Iris started her audit. "Yeah." Vincent's silence spoke volumes. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "I'm thinking we find Tommy Breslin and have a conversation about career choices." Marcus stood, walked to the window overlooking his private garden. The rain had turned it into a dark tangle of shadows. "Put everyone on it. I want him found by morning." "Boss, there's something else. I made some calls. Quiet ones. Word is the FBI's been sniffing around our Bridgeport project. Nothing concrete, but people are nervous. The FBI. The word landed like a punch to the kidneys. Marcus had paid good money to keep federal attention elsewhere. Judges, politicians, carefully placed bribes that kept his operations running smooth. If the FBI was circling, someone had given them a reason to look. How long have they been asking questions? Week, maybe 2. Could be routine. Could be something bigger. Marcus's mind worked through the implications. Tommy Breslin running. The FBI investigating. Iris Thorne finding $12 million in missing funds. The pieces didn't quite fit together, but they formed a pattern that made his instincts scream danger. Double the security on all our sites. I want to know everyone who comes and goes. And Vincent? Find out everything you can about Iris Thorne. Where she goes, who she talks to, what she does when she's not in the office. You think she's involved? I think she knows too much, and right now that makes her either an asset or a threat. I need to know which. He ended the call and poured another scotch, watching the amber liquid catch the dim light. Outside, Chicago slept under its blanket of rain, unaware that in penthouses and brownstones, in back rooms and dark alleys, an empire was beginning to fracture. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Marcus reached his office at 7, earlier than usual, driven by a restlessness that felt like insects crawling under his skin. The building was quiet, most employees not due for another hour, but when he stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor, he saw light spilling from Iris's office. She was already there, surrounded by papers and laptop screens, her face illuminated by the blue glow of spreadsheets. She looked up when his shadow fell across her doorway, and for a moment, something passed between them, a recognition of the game they were playing, though Marcus still didn't understand the rules. "You're here early," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "I wanted to finish the analysis." She gestured to the papers covering her desk. "I have your names." Marcus felt adrenaline spike through his system. He entered her office, closed the door behind him, and stood with his back against it, blocking her exit, claiming the space. "Show me." Iris stood, gathered a folder, and handed it to him. Her fingers were steady, her expression calm. 3 people. Tommy Breslin, obviously. He's been skimming from the street operations for over a year, but he's not smart enough to hide it this well. Who else? David Chen, your logistics coordinator. He's been creating phantom shipments, billing for materials that never existed, and pocketing the difference. And Sarah Voss, your attorney. She's been setting up shell companies that mirror your legitimate ones, routing money through them before it disappears offshore. Marcus felt the world tilt. David Chen handled all their shipping, knew every route, every driver, every warehouse. Sarah Voss had been his lawyer for a decade, had defended him through investigations and lawsuits, knew every legal vulnerability in his operation. If they were working together, they could dismantle everything he'd built. "You're sure?" "I have documentation, bank records, emails, transfer receipts. It's all here." Iris's voice remained steady, but Marcus saw something in her eyes. A challenge, maybe, or a test. "The question is what you're going to do about it." Marcus opened the folder, scanned the pages. The evidence was damning, meticulous, impossible to deny. Iris had built a case that would stand up in any court, though he had no intention of letting it get that far. People who stole from Marcus Cain didn't get trials. They got lessons. "Good work," he said, closing the folder. "I'll handle it from here. There's one more thing." Iris moved to her desk, pulled up something on her laptop, turned the screen toward him. "I found these transfers yesterday, after I compiled the report. They're different from the others. Larger amounts, more sophisticated routing. Someone else has been moving money, Mr. Cain. Someone with access to accounts that only you and your senior people know about." Marcus looked at the screen, saw numbers that made his blood run cold. $50 million, moved in careful increments over the past 6 months, flowing through a network of accounts so complex it would take months to untangle. This wasn't skimming. This was systematic theft on a scale that could cripple his entire operation. "Who?" The word came out as a growl. "I don't know yet. The trail goes cold in the Cayman Islands, but whoever it is, they're good. Better than Chen or Voss. This is professional-level financial engineering." Marcus felt the walls closing in. His empire, built over 2 decades of careful planning and ruthless execution, was being stolen from under him by people he'd trusted, and the only person who seemed to be on his side was this quiet accountant who knew enough to destroy him herself. He looked at Iris Thorne, really looked at her, and saw something he'd missed before. Intelligence, yes. Competence, absolutely. But also a kind of steel beneath the soft exterior, a core of something unbreakable that he'd mistaken for weakness. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, the question surprising him as much as her. Iris met his eyes, and for the first time since he'd known her, she smiled. It was a small smile, sad almost, and it didn't reach her eyes. "Because I believe in loyalty, Mr. Cain, and because I want to see justice done." The answer felt wrong somehow, like a key that almost fit but wouldn't quite turn the lock. But Marcus was drowning in betrayal, and Iris was throwing him a lifeline. He took it. "Find out who's behind the 50 million. I don't care what it takes. I want a name. I'll have it for you by tonight." Marcus nodded and left her office, the folder clutched in his hand like evidence at a crime scene. As he walked to his own office, he pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. By noon, Tommy Breslin would be found. By evening, David Chen and Sarah Voss would be having very unpleasant conversations in very private locations. And by tomorrow, everyone in his organization would remember why you didn't steal from Marcus Cain. But as he sat at his desk, looking out at the gray Chicago skyline, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. The rain had stopped, but the clouds remained, heavy and threatening. Somewhere in the building, Iris Thorne was working at her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard, building a case that would either save his empire or destroy it completely. Marcus Cain had always believed he was the smartest person in any room. It would take him another 12 hours to realize he'd been wrong about that for 3 years. Tommy Breslin was found in a motel outside Gary, Indiana, counting money and planning a new life that would never happen. Vincent's crew brought him back to Chicago in the trunk of a Lincoln Town car, and by 6 that evening, he was sitting in the basement of a warehouse Marcus owned near the old stockyards, zip-tied to a chair and bleeding from places that would make him talk, but not kill him. Not yet. Marcus stood in the shadows, watching Vincent work. He'd never enjoyed this part of the business. The violence was necessary, but distasteful, a tool like any other. What he enjoyed was the power, the knowledge that he could order a man's suffering with a word and have it executed without question. Tommy was crying now, his face swollen, his voice breaking as he confessed to everything. The skimming had started small, a few thousand here and there, money he'd convinced himself Marcus wouldn't miss. Then David Chen had approached him, offered him a bigger cut if he'd help move product without proper documentation. Then Sarah Voss had brought him in on the shell company scheme, promised him a percentage of the offshore accounts. "How much did they promise you?" Marcus asked, stepping into the light. Tommy's eyes went wide with terror. "Mr. Cain, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant—" "How much?" $2 million. When everything was done, when they'd moved enough money, I'd get $2 million and a clean exit. Marcus felt disgust curl in his stomach. $2 million to betray 15 years of protection, of opportunity, of the life Marcus had given him. "And you believed them?" Yes. Sarah showed me the accounts. It was real, Mr. Cain. The money was there. Was. Marcus nodded to Vincent, who stepped back, giving Tommy a moment to breathe. "Where are they now? Chen and Voss?" "I don't know. We weren't supposed to contact each other. Sarah said it was safer that way." Everything went through encrypted messages, apps that deleted themselves. "I swear, Mr. Cain, I don't know where they are." Marcus believed him. Tommy was too scared to lie, too broken to hold anything back, which meant Chen and Voss were in the wind, warned somehow that their operation had been discovered. The thought made Marcus's jaw clench. Someone had tipped them off. Someone inside his organization was still playing against him. He left Vincent to finish the conversation, a euphemism that would end with Tommy Breslin becoming a cautionary tale, and drove back to his office through streets slick with evening rain. The city felt different now, hostile. Every shadow could hide a traitor. Every face could belong to someone planning his downfall. Iris was still at her desk when he arrived, looking exhausted but focused. She'd changed from her dress into jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, and for a moment, Marcus saw her as something other than an employee, a woman, young and tired, working late to save his empire. "I have your name," she said without preamble. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. "Who?" "Vincent Calabresi." The world stopped. Marcus heard the words, understood them intellectually, but they made no sense. Vincent had been with him for 15 years. Vincent was his right hand, his enforcer. the person he trusted more than anyone. Vincent knew everything, controlled everything, was loyal to the point of violence. That's impossible, Marcus said, but even as he spoke, pieces were clicking into place. Vincent had been the one to tell him about the FBI investigation. Vincent had been the one to find Tommy Breslin. Vincent had access to every account, every operation, every secret Marcus had. I have the evidence. Iris turned her laptop toward him, showed him a cascade of transactions that painted a picture of systematic betrayal. He's been moving money for 2 years, long before Chen or Voss got involved. They were his recruits, his network. He used them to create noise, to make you look in the wrong direction while he built his own empire with your money. Marcus sat down heavily, feeling like he'd been punched in the chest. $50 million. 53, actually. He's been careful, patient. Another 6 months, and he would have had enough to disappear completely. New identity, new country, new life. You would have woken up one day and found your empire hollowed out from the inside. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked, looking at Iris with new eyes. You could have gone to the FBI. This evidence would put me away for life. Why bring it to me? Iris closed her laptop, folded her hands on the desk, and met his gaze with an intensity that made him feel exposed. Because I don't care about putting you in prison, Mr. Cain. I care about justice, and what Vincent did to you, what he did to all of us, that deserves a different kind of justice. What did he do to you? For the first time, Iris's composure cracked. Her eyes went hard. Her voice dropped to something cold and sharp. 3 years ago, before I worked for you, I had a sister. Her name was Emma. She was 19, studying at Northwestern, brilliant and beautiful and full of life. She got involved with one of Vincent's street dealers, started using, got in over her head with debt. When she couldn't pay, Vincent made an example of her. They found her in an alley off Ashland Avenue. The official report said overdose, but I know what really happened. Vincent killed her, Mr. Cain, and you paid him to do it. The words hit Marcus like bullets. He remembered the incident vaguely. A college girl who'd gotten mixed up with their operation. A problem that needed solving. He'd given Vincent authority to handle it. Hadn't asked for details. That was how their relationship worked. Marcus gave orders. Vincent executed them. And the empire ran smooth. I didn't know, Marcus said, and hated how weak it sounded. You didn't care. Iris stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city lights. That's the difference between you and Vincent. He's cruel because he enjoys it. You're cruel because you don't think about it at all. I don't know which is worse. If you wanted revenge, why wait 3 years? Why work for me? Because I needed to understand your operation. I needed to learn every detail, every vulnerability, every secret. I needed to become indispensable so that when the time came, you'd trust me. She turned back to him, and her face was a mask of controlled fury. Vincent stole from you, Mr. Cain, but I'm going to help you destroy him. And then I'm going to destroy you. The threat hung in the air between them, clear and undeniable. Marcus should have been angry, should have called Vincent, should have had Iris disappeared into the Chicago River before she could make good on her promise. But instead, he felt something unexpected. Respect. You've been planning this for 3 years, he said slowly. Everything. Getting hired, earning my trust, building this case. You're not an accountant. You're an assassin. I'm a sister who wants justice for Emma, and I'm willing to make a deal with the devil to get it. Marcus laughed, a short bark of sound without humor. What kind of deal? I help you take down Vincent. I give you all the evidence, help you recover the money, make sure he pays for everything he's done. In exchange, you turn yourself in. You confess to the FBI, you allocate your crimes, you go to prison like you deserve. And if I refuse, then I take this evidence to the FBI anyway, and you both go down. But at least this way, you get to choose how your empire ends. You get to go out on your feet instead of being dragged out in handcuffs. Marcus studied her, this woman who'd spent 3 years living a lie, working beside him, learning his secrets, all for a sister who'd died in an alley. He thought about Vincent, his oldest friend, his most trusted ally, stealing from him for 2 years. He thought about his empire, built on violence and corruption, finally collapsing under the weight of its own rot. How do I know you're telling the truth about Vincent? Iris pulled out her phone, played a recording. Vincent's voice, clear and unmistakable, talking to David Chen about moving money, about keeping Marcus in the dark, about the timeline for their exit. The conversation was damning. detailed, impossible to explain away. "I've been recording him for 6 months," Iris said. "I have hours of evidence, enough to bury him 10 times over." Marcus felt something break inside him, the last illusion of loyalty, the final belief that anyone in his world could be trusted. He'd built his empire on the principle that everyone had a price, and now he was learning that he'd been right. Even the people closest to him had been for sale. Even Vincent. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to call a meeting. You, Vincent, and your remaining senior people. You're going to confront him with the evidence, and you're going to let me watch while your empire tears itself apart." Marcus nodded slowly. Outside, the rain had started again, harder now, drumming against the windows like fingers demanding entry. He thought about Vincent, about loyalty and betrayal, about the sister who died in an alley, and the woman who'd spent 3 years planning revenge. "One question," he said. "When this is over, when Vincent's dealt with and I've turned myself in, what happens to you?" Iris smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "I disappear, Mr. Cain. I take my sister's ashes and I scatter them somewhere beautiful, somewhere far from Chicago, and I spend the rest of my life trying to forget that people like you and Vincent exist." She gathered her things and left, and Marcus sat alone in his office, watching the rain turn the city into a blur of lights and shadows. Tomorrow, he would destroy his oldest friend. The day after, he would destroy himself. And somewhere in the ruins, Iris Thorne would walk away free, carrying her sister's memory like a torch in the darkness. The rain fell harder, and Marcus Cain realized he'd been beaten by the quietest person in the room. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat in his brownstone, surrounded by the trappings of wealth that suddenly felt like prison walls, and thought about the architecture of his own destruction. Every decision he'd made, every person he'd trusted, every shortcut he'd taken. They'd all led to this moment, sitting alone in the dark while his empire crumbled around him. At 4 a.m, his phone rang. Vincent's name on the screen. "We found Chen," Vincent said, his voice tight with satisfaction. "He was trying to board a flight to Singapore. We got him at O'Hare." Marcus felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, just a hollow awareness that Vincent was playing his role perfectly, pretending loyalty while planning his escape. "Bring him to the warehouse. I'll be there at dawn." "Boss, you okay? You sound off." "I'm fine, just tired. This whole thing with the theft, it's getting to me. We'll handle it. That's what I'm here for." Vincent's voice carried warmth, concern, the tone of a friend who'd been through wars together. It made Marcus sick. "I know. See you at dawn." He ended the call and sat in the darkness, thinking about friendship. He and Vincent had grown up together on the South Side, 2 kids from nothing who'd clawed their way up through violence and ambition. They'd built this empire together, brick by bloody brick. Vincent had been at his wedding, had held his daughter when she was born, had been there when Marcus's wife left him because she couldn't live with what he'd become. And all that time, Vincent had been planning to betray him. Marcus poured himself a drink, then poured it down the sink. He needed to be sharp for what was coming. He needed to be the Marcus Cain who'd built an empire, not the one who was about to watch it fall. Dawn came cold and gray, the sun hidden behind clouds that promised more rain. Marcus drove to the warehouse alone, his Audi cutting through empty streets, past closed shops and homeless people huddled in doorways. Chicago in the early morning was a different city, quieter, more honest, stripped of the pretense that daylight brought. Vincent was waiting in the warehouse office, drinking coffee from a paper cup and looking tired, but satisfied. David Chen was in the basement, zip-tied and terrified, waiting for the same conversation Tommy Breslin had endured. "Want me to start without you?" Vincent asked, gesturing toward the basement stairs. "No, I want to talk to you first." Something in Marcus's tone made Vincent's expression shift. "What's going on?" Marcus pulled out his phone, opened the folder Iris had sent him, and handed it to Vincent. "I want you to look at this and tell me what you see." Vincent took the phone, scrolled through the documents, and Marcus watched his face carefully. He saw the moment Vincent understood, the slight widening of his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hand tightened around the phone. "Where did you get this?" Vincent asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Iris Thorne. She's been investigating the theft. Turns out she's very good at her job. This is bullshit. Someone's setting me up. That's what I thought at first. Then I listened to the recordings." Marcus played one. Vincent's voice filling the office, talking about moving money, about keeping Marcus in the dark. Want to explain that? Vincent set the phone down slowly, and when he looked up, the mask was gone. No more pretense of friendship, no more loyalty, just cold calculation. How long have you known? Since last night. Iris brought me everything. The accounts, the transfers, the recordings. $53 million, Vincent. 2 years of stealing from me while pretending to be my friend. Vincent laughed, a bitter sound. You want to talk about friendship, Marcus? You've been treating me like an employee for 15 years. I do your dirty work, I clean up your messes, I make your problems disappear. And what do I get? A salary, a pat on the head, the privilege of watching you live like a king while I'm still driving a 5-year-old car and living in a condo in Wicker Park. I made you rich. I gave you power, respect. You gave me scraps from your table. Vincent's voice rose, years of resentment pouring out. I built this empire as much as you did. I put in the work, took the risks, got my hands dirty while you sat in your penthouse and played businessman. And you know what? I got tired of waiting for you to recognize that. So I decided to take what I'd earned. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. You earned nothing. Everything you have, I gave you. And you repaid me by stealing. I repaid you by being loyal for 15 years. But loyalty has a price, Marcus. And you never wanted to pay it. They stared at each other across the office. 2 men who'd built an empire together and were now watching it collapse. Outside, Marcus heard a car pull up, doors opening and closing. He'd called this meeting for a reason, and now it was time to see it through. I'm giving you one chance, Marcus said quietly. Return the money, all of it. Tell me where it is, how to access it, and I'll let you walk away. You disappear, you never come back to Chicago, and we're done. Vincent smiled, and it was the saddest thing Marcus had ever seen. You really think I'd trust you to keep that deal? The moment I tell you where the money is, I'm dead. You'll have Vincent put a bullet in my head and dump me in the lake. He paused. Oh wait, I'm Vincent. Guess you'll have to get your hands dirty yourself for once. I could call the FBI right now. Iris gave me everything they'd need to put you away for 20 years. And put yourself away in the process. That evidence doesn't just incriminate me, Marcus. It shows every crime we've committed together. You turn me in, you're confessing to everything. Marcus realized Vincent was right. The evidence was a double-edged sword. It could destroy Vincent, but it would take Marcus down too. Iris had known that when she compiled it. She'd built a trap that would catch them both. So what now? Marcus asked. We just walk away. Pretend none of this happened? Now we negotiate. I keep $30 million. Call it severance pay for 15 years of service. You keep the rest in your empire. I disappear. You never hear from me again. Everyone wins. Except the people you recruited. Chen, Voss, Tommy. What happens to them? Vincent shrugged. They were useful idiots. Do whatever you want with them. I don't care. Marcus thought about Tommy Breslin, already dead in a shallow grave outside the city. He thought about David Chen in the basement, waiting for judgment. He thought about Sarah Voss, still missing, probably already on a beach somewhere spending Vincent's money. I can't let you walk away, Marcus said finally. Not after this. It would make me look weak. Everyone in the organization would know you stole from me and got away with it. I'd lose everything. Then I guess we're at an impasse. The office door opened, and Iris Thorne walked in, followed by 4 men in FBI windbreakers. Vincent's face went white. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Marcus Cain. Vincent Calabrese. You're both under arrest, the lead agent said, pulling out handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Marcus barely heard the Miranda warning. He was watching Iris, standing in the doorway with an expression of grim satisfaction. She'd played them both perfectly, made Marcus think she wanted a deal, made him confront Vincent, gotten them both in the same room with evidence of their crimes. You said we had a deal, Marcus said to her, his voice hollow. I said I'd help you take down Vincent. I never said I'd let you walk away. Iris stepped closer, and Marcus saw the 3 years of planning in her eyes, the patience of someone who'd waited for exactly this moment. My sister died because of you. Both of you. You gave the order, Vincent executed it, and Emma paid the price. So now you both pay. Vincent lunged at her, but the FBI agents grabbed him, slammed him against the wall. Marcus just stood there, feeling the handcuffs close around his wrists, cold and final. I can hire 50 like you, Marcus said quietly, remembering the words he'd spoken to an employee years ago, someone who'd challenged him. He couldn't remember the person's face, but he remembered the arrogance in his own voice, the certainty that everyone was replaceable. Iris heard him and smiled. Do it, she said, throwing his words back at him. See where it gets you. They led him out of the warehouse in handcuffs, past David Chen being brought up from the basement, past Vincent screaming about lawyers and deals. Outside, the rain had started again, and Marcus tilted his face up to it, feeling the cold water wash over him like absolution he didn't deserve. His empire was gone. His freedom was gone. Everything he'd built over 20 years had collapsed in a single morning, brought down by a quiet woman who'd loved her sister enough to spend 3 years planning revenge. As they put him in the back of an FBI car, Marcus caught one last glimpse of Iris Thorne, standing in the warehouse doorway, watching him with eyes that held no triumph, only exhaustion. She'd won, but it had cost her 3 years of her life, 3 years of pretending to be someone she wasn't. The car pulled away, and Marcus watched Chicago disappear behind him. His city, his kingdom, now just another place he'd never see again. He thought about Vincent, about betrayal and loyalty, and the price of empire. He thought about Emma Thorne, dead in an alley, and her sister who'd avenged her. And he thought about the moment everything had gone wrong, the decision that had set all of this in motion. It wasn't hiring Iris. It wasn't trusting Vincent. It was believing that people were disposable, that loyalty could be bought, that he was untouchable. Marcus Cain had built his empire on the principle that everyone had a price. In the end, he'd learned that some people couldn't be bought. They could only be reckoned with. The rain fell harder, and the city disappeared behind him, and Marcus Cain went to meet his judgment. The FBI field office on West Roosevelt Road was a fortress of bureaucracy and fluorescent lights, where empires came to die in interview rooms and plea negotiations. Marcus sat in one such room, handcuffed to a table, watching Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh arrange her files with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. She was 45, sharp-featured, with gray threading her auburn hair, and eyes that had seen every lie a criminal could tell. Marcus recognized her from news reports. She'd built her career prosecuting organized crime, had put away mob bosses and corrupt politicians with equal efficiency. Mr. Cain, I'm going to be direct with you, Walsh said, opening a folder that Marcus recognized as Iris's evidence. We have enough here to put you away for the rest of your life. RICO charges, money laundering, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit murder. You're looking at 40 years minimum, probably more once we finish investigating. Marcus said nothing. His lawyer, a nervous man named Patterson who'd been pulled from bed at dawn, sat beside him looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. However, Walsh continued, you have something we want. Information, names, details about your operation that could help us dismantle the entire network. You cooperate fully, and I can probably get you down to 20 years. You'd be 70 when you got out. Still have some life left. And Vincent? Marcus asked. Mr. Calabrese is in another room having a similar conversation. Whoever talks first gets the better deal. That's how this works. Marcus almost laughed. Even now, even in custody, he and Vincent were competing. 15 years of friendship reduced to a race to betray each other for a lighter sentence. I want to talk to Iris Thorne, Marcus said. Walsh raised an eyebrow. Ms. Thorne is a cooperating witness. She's not available for conversations with defendants. Then I'm not cooperating. Patterson grabbed his arm. Marcus, don't be stupid. This is your only chance. I said I want to talk to Iris Thorne. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Walsh studied him, calculating. Why? Because she spent 3 years planning this. She deserves to hear what I have to say. After a long moment, Walsh nodded. 5 minutes. But I'll be in the room, and if you threaten her in any way, the deal's off the table. They brought Iris in 20 minutes later. She looked exhausted, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. She sat across from Marcus, and for a moment, they just looked at each other, predator and prey, except Marcus was no longer sure which was which. You won, Marcus said quietly. I hope it was worth it. My sister is still dead. Nothing's worth that. No, but you got justice. That's what you wanted, right? Vincent and me, paying for what we did. Iris nodded slowly. It's what Emma deserved. Tell me about her. Not the girl who died in an alley. The sister you loved. Iris looked surprised, then suspicious. Why? Because I want to understand what I took from you. I want to know what I destroyed. For a long moment, Iris said nothing. Then quietly, she began to talk. Emma was brilliant. She wanted to be a doctor, was studying pre-med at Northwestern. She loved old movies, the kind with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. She used to dance around our apartment, pretending she was in a ballroom instead of a studio in Rogers Park. She made friends everywhere she went, had this way of making people feel seen, feel important. She was everything good in the world, and I loved her more than anything. What happened? She met a boy, one of Vincent's dealers, working the Northwestern campus. He got her hooked on pills, then harder stuff. When she couldn't pay, Vincent decided to make an example. He had her beaten, left her in that alley with enough drugs in her system to stop her heart. The police called it an overdose. I knew better. Marcus felt something crack inside him. Not quite guilt, but an awareness of the human cost of his empire. Emma Thorne had been a name in a report, a problem solved. He'd never thought about the sister who'd loved her, the life that had been stolen, the ripple effects of violence. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. Sorry doesn't bring her back. Sorry doesn't give me the 3 years I spent pretending to be someone I'm not. Sorry doesn't fix anything, Mr. Cain. No, but it's all I have to offer. Marcus leaned forward as much as the handcuffs would allow. I'm going to cooperate with the FBI. I'm going to tell them everything, every operation, every crime, every person involved. Not for a lighter sentence, not for a deal, but because you're right. What I built, what I became, it needed to end. Iris's eyes widened slightly. Why are you telling me this? Because you spent 3 years of your life destroying me. I want you to know it worked. I want you to know that when you scatter Emma's ashes, you can tell her that the men who killed her paid for it. Both of us. Walsh shifted in her chair. Mr. Cain, if you're serious about cooperation, I am. I'll tell you everything. But first, I need to know. Iris, what happens to you now? Iris stood, and for the first time since Marcus had known her, she looked free. I'm going to leave Chicago. I'm going to find somewhere quiet, somewhere far from all of this. And I'm going to try to remember who I was before Emma died, before I spent 3 years living a lie. Will you find it? That person you used to be? I don't know, but I have to try. She left, and Marcus watched her go. This woman who dismantled his empire with patience and precision. Walsh pulled out a legal pad and a recorder, and Marcus began to talk. He talked for hours, days, weeks. He gave them everything. Names, dates, locations, bank accounts. He described crimes going back 20 years, implicated dozens of people, mapped out an entire criminal network that had operated in Chicago's shadows. Vincent, in another room, was doing the same thing. They'd both chosen betrayal in the end, racing to sell out everyone they'd ever worked with for a few years off their sentences. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. 6 months later, Marcus Cain stood in a federal courtroom and pleaded guilty to 47 counts of various crimes. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, sentenced him to 30 years in federal prison. Vincent Calabresi, in a separate hearing, got 35. Marcus was transferred to a medium-security facility in downstate Illinois, a place of concrete and razor wire where former crime bosses learned to survive among the people they'd once commanded. He worked in the prison library, kept his head down, and tried not to think about the empire he'd lost. One day, about a year into his sentence, he received a letter. No return address. Postmarked from somewhere in Montana. Inside was a single photograph. Iris Thorne standing on a mountain ridge, the wind in her hair, holding an urn. Behind her, the landscape stretched out in endless beauty, mountains and sky and freedom. On the back, she'd written, "Emma's home now. So am I. Thank you for keeping your word." Marcus put the photograph on the wall of his cell, next to nothing else. He looked at it sometimes, when the weight of his choices became too heavy, and thought about the sister who died in an alley, and the woman who'd avenged her. He thought about empire and loyalty, about the price of power and the cost of redemption. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, Marcus Cain allowed himself to hope that somewhere in Montana, Iris Thorne was learning to be free. 3 years into his sentence, Marcus Cain received a visitor. Not his lawyer, not a family member. He had none left who'd claim him. But a journalist named Sarah Chen, writing a book about organized crime in Chicago. She was young, earnest, reminded him a little of Emma Thorne, though he'd never met Emma except as a name in a file. They sat in the visiting room, separated by a plexiglass barrier, and Sarah asked him questions about his empire, his crimes, his fall. Marcus answered honestly, finding a strange relief in confession. He'd spent 20 years building lies, and now he had nothing left but truth. "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked near the end of their conversation. "Everything you did, everything you built." Marcus thought about that. "I regret the people I hurt. I regret Emma Thorne, dying in an alley because I gave an order without thinking about the consequences. I regret the lives I destroyed, the families I broke apart, the empire itself." He shrugged. That was always going to fall. Empires built on violence always do. I just wish I'd understood that before it cost so much. What about Iris Thorne? Do you think about her? Every day. She beat me with patience and planning. She spent 3 years becoming someone else just to destroy me. That takes a kind of strength I never had. Have you heard from her? Once. A letter. A photograph. She's somewhere out west, living a quiet life. That's all I know. And it's all I need to know. She won. She got her justice. I hope it brought her peace. Sarah closed her notebook. One last question. If you could go back, knowing everything you know now, would you do it differently? Marcus looked out the window at the prison yard, where men walked in circles, killing time until time killed them. He thought about his brownstone in Lincoln Park, his penthouse office, the city that had bent to his will. He thought about Vincent's betrayal, about Iris's revenge, about the moment everything had fallen apart. "I'd like to say yes," he said finally. "I'd like to think I'd choose differently, build something legitimate, hurt fewer people. But honestly, I don't know. The man I was, the Marcus Cain who built that empire, he wouldn't have listened to warnings. He thought he was untouchable. It took losing everything to teach me I was wrong." Sarah left, and Marcus returned to his cell. That night, he lay on his bunk and thought about the photograph on his wall. Iris on a mountain, holding her sister's ashes, finally free. He thought about the rain that had fallen the day his empire collapsed, washing the streets of Chicago clean. In Montana, Iris Thorne was sitting on the porch of a small cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains. She'd bought the place with money she'd saved over 3 years of working for Marcus Cain, money earned through patience and planning. The cabin was simple. 1 bedroom, a wood stove, no neighbors for miles. It was everything she'd dreamed about during those long nights in Chicago, pretending to be someone she wasn't. Emma's ashes were scattered now, spread across a meadow filled with wildflowers. Iris visited the place sometimes, sat among the flowers, and talked to her sister about everything and nothing. She told Emma about Marcus Cain's confession, about Vincent Calabrese's sentence, about the empire that had crumbled because one woman refused to let injustice stand. She'd started painting again, something she'd given up when Emma died. Watercolors mostly, landscapes of the mountains and sky. They weren't very good, but they were hers, and that was enough. She was learning to be Iris Thorne again, not the accountant who'd infiltrated a criminal empire, but the woman who'd existed before grief and revenge had consumed her. Sometimes, late at night, she thought about Marcus Cain in his prison cell. She wondered if he understood what he'd taken from her, if 30 years behind bars was enough payment for Emma's life. The answer was always no. Nothing could balance that equation. But it was something. It was justice, imperfect and incomplete, but real. One evening, as the sun painted the mountains gold and red, Iris received a letter. No return address, but she recognized the handwriting from legal documents she'd seen years ago. Sarah Voss, Marcus's former attorney, writing from somewhere in South America. The letter was brief. "I heard what you did. I'm sorry about your sister. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I was part of the machine that killed her. I can't undo the past, but I wanted you to know that some of us got out, started over, tried to be better. I hope you find peace, Iris. You earned it." Iris burned the letter in her wood stove and watched the ashes float up the chimney. She didn't want Sarah Voss's apology, didn't need forgiveness from people who'd profited from pain. What she wanted was to wake up each morning and not think about Marcus Cain or Vincent Calabrese, or the 3 years she'd spent living a lie. Slowly, day by day, she was getting there. In Chicago, the city moved on. Marcus Cain's empire was dismantled, his properties seized, his operations shut down. Other criminals rose to fill the vacuum, because that's what cities did. They adapted, evolved, found new equilibriums, The people who'd worked for Marcus scattered, some arrested, some disappeared, some trying to build legitimate lives from the ruins. The brownstone in Lincoln Park was sold at auction, bought by a tech entrepreneur who knew nothing about its history. The penthouse office on West Wacker Drive became home to a consulting firm. The warehouse near the stockyards was torn down, replaced by luxury condos that would never know the blood that had soaked into their foundations. And in a federal prison in downstate Illinois, Marcus Cain learned to live with his choices. He taught other inmates to read, worked in the library, kept his head down. He was no longer a crime boss, no longer an emperor. He was just another prisoner, counting days, waiting for a freedom that would come when he was too old to enjoy it. But sometimes, when the rain fell and the sound echoed through the prison corridors, Marcus would close his eyes and remember standing at his office window, watching Chicago spread out beneath him like a kingdom. He'd remember the moment Iris Thorne had walked into his office with evidence of betrayal, the moment everything had started to unravel. He'd remember her words, "I can hire 50 like you. Do it." And he'd remember learning, too late, that some people couldn't be bought or broken. They could only be reckoned with. The rain would stop, and Marcus would open his eyes to his cell, to his reality, to the consequences of 20 years of choices. And he would accept it, because acceptance was all he had left. In Montana, Iris Thorne painted mountains and sky. In Chicago, the city rebuilt itself over the ruins of an empire. And in a prison cell, Marcus Cain learned that the hardest sentence wasn't the years behind bars. It was living with the knowledge of what he'd become and what it had cost. The photograph on his wall showed a woman on a mountain, holding an urn, finally free. Marcus looked at it every day and thought about redemption, about whether it was possible for people like him. He didn't know the answer, but he had 30 years to figure it out. Outside, the seasons changed. Winter came, then spring, then summer. The world kept turning, indifferent to empires and their fall. And somewhere in all that movement, in all that change, there was a kind of justice, imperfect, incomplete, but real. Marcus Cain had built his empire on the principle that everyone had a price. Iris Thorne had proven him wrong, and in that proof, in that quiet act of revenge, something had shifted in the universe. Not enough to balance the scales. Emma Thorne was still dead, and nothing would change that, but enough to matter. Enough to let one woman scatter her sister's ashes in a mountain meadow and begin to heal. Enough to teach one man that power without conscience was just another form of prison. Enough to remind a city that empires rise and fall, but the people they hurt keep living, keep fighting, keep seeking justice in whatever form they can find. The rain fell on Chicago, washing the streets clean. The sun rose over Montana, painting the mountains gold. And in the space between those two places, between rain and sun, between empire and freedom, two people learned to live with what they'd done and what had been done to them. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something. It was enough. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Let me know which moment resonated with you most, and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life.